Okay, so let's say you've built an amazing piece of software. You're ready to take it global. And your first target? The massive Portuguese-speaking market. Sounds simple enough, right? Just translate the interface and you're good to go. No, not so fast. As you're about to see, it is way more complicated than that. Let's dive in.
So what do they have in common? I mean, the obvious answer is they both speak Portuguese. But here's the thing. When it comes to actually using your software, that shared language is just the starting line for a story that jumps across continents, different legal systems, and even just basic grammar. The reality is so much more complex and, honestly, a lot more interesting.
So here it is, the core challenge. This idea that Portuguese is just one thing, well, it's kind of a convenient fiction. In reality, it's a whole collection of distinct worlds, and each one has its own rules, its own vocabulary, its own expectations. And for a software company, if you get this wrong, you're not just poorly translated, you are speaking a completely foreign language to your user.
And how big is this challenge really? Well, get this. It spans 4 continents. Portuguese is the official language for business in countries all over Europe, South America, Africa, and even parts of Asia. We're talking about the entire Lusophone world, and each one of these places has its own unique financial and cultural DNA.
This is where you see the first huge roadblock. The deep structural differences. I mean, look at this. An accountant in Portugal, they're using the SNC standard. But one in Brazil, totally different. They use CPC, which is lined up with international IFRS standards. Then you go to Guinea-Bissau, and they're using the Cisco HADA system, which is common across a lot of African nations. They all speak Portuguese, but the very foundation of their accounting systems are worlds apart.
And that brings us to the first major hurdle for any developer, what we can call the translation trap. This is that moment you realize that even the words themselves aren't universal. A simple word-for-word translation doesn't just feel a little clunky, it can make your software completely unusable.
Let's take a super basic example, the word for file in a software menu. In Portugal, the standard word is ficheiro, but in Brazil, it's arquivo. Now, if a user in Brazil opens your app and sees ficheiro, it is an instant red flag. It immediately signals, hey, this thing wasn't made for me. It feels foreign from the very first click.
And the divide just keeps going. Even with the most basic commands you can think of. A user in Portugal expects to see guardar for save, but a Brazilian user is looking for salvar. You know, these might seem like tiny little details, but in user interface design, this stuff is everything. It's what builds that sense of trust and familiarity with the product.
So what this really shows us is that it's not just about swapping out vocabulary. It's about fundamental grammar and tone. In Portugal, instructions are often in the infinitive, to save. But in Brazil, the software speaks in the imperative. It's a direct command, save the data. Even the word for user is different. It goes from utilizador to usuario. To really succeed, you have to adapt the entire personality of your software.
Okay, so if you thought language was a minefield, wait until you see the tax system. This is a whole other level. The legal and financial structures in these countries are just monumentally different. This is where simple translation totally breaks down, and you need deep, complex localization.
I mean, the differences here are just stark. In Portugal and Lusophone Africa, the main tax is IVA, which is a value-added tax. In Brazil, that concept doesn't really exist in the same way. Instead, you've got this incredibly complex web of different taxes called impostos. The tax ID, the name for an invoice, every single core concept is completely different.
And here's the kicker. All this complexity is a moving target. Right now, Brazil is in the middle of a massive, historic tax reform. Starting in 2026, it's moving to a new dual VAT system. So any software operating there doesn't just have to handle the old system, but also the new one that's being phased in. Localization isn't a one-and-done job. It's this constant process of adaptation.
To really hammer this point home, let's just look at the Brazilian nota fiscal. In most countries, an invoice is just a record between a buyer and a seller, right? Well, in Brazil, the nota fiscal is a legal document that gets transmitted electronically to the federal tax authority in real time. If your software can't do this, it's not just badly translated, it's literally illegal to use for business.
So how in the world do you solve these enormous challenges? Well, it all comes down to meticulous, detailed technical work. This is where we go way beyond just translation and into true localization.
And the stakes are incredibly high. This warning from a developer's guide says it all. You can't just go in and tinker with the language files, one software update and, poof, all your custom work could be completely erased. The whole process has to be structured from the ground up to last.
So how is it done the right way? Well, the process often starts with a kind of base template.
A developer downloads an empty framework, switches the interface to the target language, and then, and this is the crucial part, they go in and manually translate not just words, but core accounting concepts like invoice or debtor's control right inside the software's editor. You're building a new, native foundation from the inside out.
And this is a perfect example of how localization goes so much deeper than just text. Sometimes you have to actually change the software's architecture. There was a common bug, a dynamic SQL error, 303, that kept popping up because the database fields for account descriptions were just too short for some languages. The fix? It was to expand that field length from 35 all the way to 128 characters. This had nothing to do with translation. It was a database engineering problem, and it was required to meet international standards that just need more detailed descriptions.
So in all of this incredibly detailed work, the linguistic, the legal, and the technical stuff finally comes together. The result is something really special. It's the difference between a product that is just available in a country and one that actually belongs there. So, at the end of the day, what's the ultimate goal here? It's assimilation. It's about creating an experience that is so seamless, so natural, that the user in São Paulo or Lisbon or Luanda feels like the software was built from the ground up just for them, in their world, by people who actually get their unique needs.
And that leaves you with a final thought. The next time you flip the language setting on an app you use every day, just take a second to think about the immense, hidden complexity that's at play. You're not just looking at a translation, you're seeing the tiny tip of an iceberg, with entire worlds of legal, cultural, and technical work hidden right beneath the surface.